The last thing he said before he left was, "You'll never make it." He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He didn't even raise his voice. That sentence fell from his lips as softly as a sigh, but it sliced through me like glass. The way he said it was what hurt most, like he wasn't trying to be cruel, like he actually believed it. He stood in the doorway with the morning light behind him, bag slung over his shoulder. The same doorway we'd stood in 100 times, laughing, arguing, kissing. But this time, there was nothing. Just a quiet that felt final. I stood barefoot on the kitchen floor, holding the coffee I'd made him, steam curling up and vanishing. I remember how the air smelled faintly like cinnamon and how a small patch of sunlight spilled over the counter. Those small, stupid details burn themselves into your memory when something ends. He didn't look back when he closed the door. At first, I didn't cry. I didn't shout or chase after him. I just stood there, still as the steam rising from my mug. Because the truth is, a part of me had known for a while that he'd stopped believing in me. I'd felt it in the way his silence had grown heavier, in the way his sighs got longer every time I talked about my dream. When we first met, he used to call me brave. He loved how I talked about the future like it was already mine. He loved the way my eyes lit up when I explained what I wanted to build. He used to say, "I've never met anyone who believes in something like you do. But dreams are beautiful in the beginning. And then, when they take too long, they start to annoy people who can't see them." My dream was messy. It didn't come with a guarantee or a paycheck. It was made of ideas and sleepless nights, scribbles on paper, rejections that made me question everything, but never enough to stop. I had a company, small, fragile, and invisible to almost everyone. But it was mine. He, on the other hand, loved certainty. He liked plans, numbers, predictable outcomes. I loved him, but slowly, my dream became something he tolerated rather than admired. He tolerated the long nights at my desk, the empty take-out boxes, the way I lit up at things that didn't make sense to him. "You need to be realistic," he would say. "People don't just wake up one day and make it." He'd said that line so many times, it had become a chorus in our apartment. The night before he left, we had one of those quiet fights. No screaming. Just sharp edges hidden in soft words. I'd told him I was close, that the contract I'd spent months fighting for might finally happen. He looked at me with that half smile. The one that used to make me melt, but now made my stomach twist. "You've been saying that for years," he said. "Because I've been working for years," I answered. "And what if it never happens?" "It will." He shook his head slowly, like he was looking at a child who refused to grow up. "You're betting everything on something that might not exist. Do you know how insane that sounds?" I stared at him and said the only thing I could. I'd rather go broke believing in myself than live small doubting it. That was the moment something between us cracked. Not loudly. Just a quiet, clean break. And the next morning, he stood in that doorway and said the words that would echo inside me all day. "You'll never make it." The sound of the door closing after him was louder than any fight we'd ever had. I sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were shaking. Not because of him leaving exactly, but because of what those words touched inside me. I'd spent years trying to build something out of nothing. Years hearing no from investors, clients, friends who smiled politely, but didn't believe me. I could take it from them. But from him, the man who'd watched me build, who'd kissed my forehead on sleepless nights. That cut differently. The hours after he left blurred together. I walked through the apartment like it belonged to someone else. My laptop still glowed on the desk. My notes were still scattered. My sketches and blueprints still taped to the wall. My world hadn't changed. Only the way it felt had. I sat down and stared at the mess I'd created, not the emotional kind, the literal one. Coffee rings on the table. Sticky notes everywhere. Empty takeout containers. It was ugly, but it was real. It was the evidence of every night I'd chosen to keep going when no one was watching. I could still hear him in my head. "You'll never make it." But beneath the ache, something else flickered. A spark, a quiet, stubborn flame. Because I've heard that line before. From teachers, from investors, from people who meant well, and from those who didn't. Every time, it became a kind of fuel. That night, while the world outside was sleeping, I went back to work. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't text him. I didn't make any speeches. I opened my laptop, tore apart my pitch deck, and rebuilt it from scratch. I wrote emails I'd been too afraid to send. I called people who had already said no and asked them to look again. I didn't do it with hope. I did it with fire. By the time the sun began to rise, painting soft gold light across the floor, my hands were cramped from typing, my voice raw from rehearsing. But I felt alive. More alive than I had in months. At 7:43 a.m., my inbox pinged. I almost ignored it. I thought it was another rejection. But I opened it anyway. The subject line said, "Contract approval. Congratulations." For a second, everything around me blurred. My chest tightened, my throat burned. I opened the email, blinking through the fog of exhaustion, and then I saw it. The number, $125 million, $125 million. I read it again. And again. Slowly, as if the words might vanish if I blinked too fast. My breath hitched. I laughed a raw, shaky sound that broke open into something bigger. I pressed my hand against my mouth as tears rolled down my cheeks. I'd done it. The deal I'd spent 2 years chasing was real. My company, the one that lived on scraps, the one he said would never make it, had just secured a $125 million contract. I printed the contract and placed the thick stack of papers on the table. For a long time, I just stared at it. Not because of the number itself, but because it represented every night I didn't give up. Every no I swallowed. Every time I whispered to myself in the dark. One day, at 10:12 a.m., my phone rang. His name lit up on the screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I didn't need him to know. I didn't need to tell him anything. But curiosity can be a quiet, persistent thing. I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was softer than yesterday. "Hey," I said back. "I left some things there. Can I come by and get them?" Sure, when he arrived that evening, he looked the same, but everything between us had changed. I was sitting on the couch, calm in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. He walked in like someone entering a place that no longer belonged to him. His eyes fell on the contract lying on the table. "What's that?" he asked. I let him look before I answered. "Just a contract." He stepped closer, and then he saw the number. I watched his face shift. His breath caught, just for a second. "Is that real?" "Yes, 125 million. I nodded. The silence between us stretched, long and quiet. I could almost hear his thoughts. The disbelief, the math, the sudden, sharp understanding of what he'd walked away from, not the money, but the belief. "You really did it," he said finally. His voice wasn't arrogant anymore. It was soft, small. "I did," I replied. He shoved his hands into his pockets. He looked around the apartment like it was a place he no longer recognized. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I know," I said. I handed him the box with his things. He turned toward the door, paused, and looked at me one last time. "You proved me wrong," he said. "I wasn't trying to," I replied. "I was just proving myself right." When he closed the door behind him this time, it didn't sound loud. It didn't sting. It was quiet, clean. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine from the corner shelf, the same kind I'd been drinking on nights I couldn't afford anything better. I sat in front of the contract and let the quiet fill the room. This was the moment no one saw coming. The one they said would never arrive. The one I kept fighting for when the world was telling me to quit. I thought about every time I'd gone to bed with a knot in my stomach. Every rejection. Every time someone smiled politely at me like I was naive. Every night I whispered, "Just hold on a little longer. Success doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the form of an email at 7:43 a.m., the day after someone tells you that you'll never make it." The weeks that followed felt like watching the world spin in reverse. Suddenly, the people who ignored my calls wanted meetings. The ones who doubted me were now calling me a visionary. Investors who once brushed me off were lining up. It was surreal, and him. He texted twice after that. A small congratulations. I saw the news. Wow. I responded politely. Nothing more. Not because I was angry. Because I was free. Months later, I stood on the top floor of my company's new building. Real walls. Real people. Real life. The skyline stretched before me, the same skyline I used to stare at from my tiny apartment, whispering promises to myself. I pressed my hand against the cool glass and closed my eyes. I could still hear his voice. "You'll never make it." But this time, the words didn't hurt. They didn't sting. They felt like a spark from long ago. A spark that started a fire I refused to let die. I opened my eyes, smiled at the city below, and whispered, I did, not just I made it bigger. Bigger than his belief. Bigger than every no. Bigger than the nights I thought I wouldn't make it. Bigger than my fear. I didn't need everyone to believe in me. I just needed to believe in myself long enough for the world to catch up. And it did, quietly, powerfully.